Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 77 of the Strokecast. This week, I want to talk about a few different things. I want to talk about my recent experience at Swedish at the leadership meeting. I also want to talk about the Starbucks model for stroke recovery. And by the way, Starbucks is not sponsoring this episode. However, if you're at Starbucks and are interested in doing so, give me a call. Let's talk. And I want to share a couple of updates about some prior Strokecast guests. So, first of all, the other day I was invited to participate in the COO's leadership meeting at Swedish Cherry Hill, where I received my treatment for stroke 2 years ago. They wanted to incorporate some patient experience and thoughts about what was great and what was not so great during their time in the hospital. And I absolutely appreciate the fact that David West, the COO of Swedish Cherry Hill, is interested in dedicating time among all of these department heads to incorporate that patient experience. That's really important for a lot of reasons. But one of the things I talked about there, and again, as I've talked in the past, I've always been very pleased overall with my care at Swedish. And one of the things I've talked about at that meeting was the futility of the jelly packets. And yes, I know this is a silly little thing, it seems. But at the hospital, each morning when you would get your breakfast, they would include, my English muffin or my toast or whatever. And it would come with these little jelly packets that you're probably used to seeing at a diner or in hotel room service. They're the little plastic things. You peel back the label and then you can scoop out a tiny portion of jelly or jam. And they're fine. I know in college I always used to hoard as many of them as I could, because you never know when you're going to need that quick sugar hit of fake fruit, which is certainly its own kind of special joy. But after stroke, I of course found myself with only one functional hand. And you can't use those things if you don't have two hands, because first of all, peeling the lid back is tough enough. But then you got to try and get the jelly out of this little tiny plastic thing using your knife or other utensil and then spread it onto your bread product. And to do that, typically you have to be able to hold on to that jelly packet with your other hand. When you can't do that, you just can't get any leverage and you end up just sort of pushing the whole thing around your tray or knocking it onto the floor. Trying to do that one-handed with your knife. And I talk about this a lot because, well, it seems like it's just a painfully obvious flaw in the system. And it's kind of funny, too, to talk about something that's so minor. It was after this meeting, as I was driving to my next appointment for the day, that I began thinking more about just why did this silly little thing stick with me so much? And I finally realized what it was. It's because this was so minor. I mean, we're talking about putting jelly on my English muffin, and it's a very tiny amount of jelly at that. It's such a minor thing, but I was failing at it. And it meant that every day in the hospital, I started my day with a failure. In terms of stroke or other neuro recovery, mindset is so important. I talk so much about the importance of having that action-oriented mindset, about the power of yet in thinking about how I can make things different for tomorrow, and just how essential that is to recovery. The right mindset doesn't guarantee recovery, but if you don't have the right mindset, you're not going to recover. And every day, I started failing to accomplish a task. I listened to clips of leadership in the military and heard other stories about one of the things that's so important and that they stress for soldiers and in basic training and is making your bed and just doing that so basically to start your day. You got to make your bed. You got to get it clean because that means you start your day already having accomplished something. And once you've accomplished something so basic and so fundamental, it really prepares you for success later in the day. And that's one reason why that is a core element of military training. And in my case, it was the exact opposite. I was starting my day failing at a small task. And of course, what you do with that, obviously depends on how you're going to approach the rest of the day, and you've got to get past it because ultimately, practically, it is a very small thing. But those small things can add up. And so that's, I guess, why that little thing has stuck with me. So for those of you who order catering supplies for a hospital, I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't already tried, try doing everything that a typical diner would do, a typical person eating your food would do. Try doing it with just one hand and see if you can encounter some of the challenges that your patients are likely to encounter. And if you are buying jellies and jams and butter and all those other things, take a look at other packets that don't require two hands to use. I think things like ketchup packets that we often see, mayonnaise packets, etc., where you can tear open the top of the packet, and I use my teeth for that, and then you can squeeze out the product, can be so much easier. Of course, that's also because I have teeth, and there are other challenges that other folks may have, but these are all things that maybe there aren't easy answers for all these things, but they're things that need to be thought about. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is about my view on the Starbucks model for stroke recovery. And again, hey, Starbucks, if you want to go ahead and sponsor the show, let me know. Bill@strokecast.com. Let's talk. But this has come up a couple of times for me. And I want to share this clip from the Aphasia Access Conversations podcast.
Not that many years ago, I was working with a student. So this was a case where I was supervising intervention with a client who was bilingual. He was Spanish speaking and English speaking. He had a pretty significant stroke. Immediately after his stroke, he primarily spoke Spanish. His English was gone. Even his Spanish was limited to a single word. We tried all kinds of things to try to get some response, comprehension, or production in English. Couldn't get anything. So we really spent quite a bit of time focusing on getting his Spanish back. And so we worked with that pretty diligently to the point where he could have conversations in Spanish, was very fluent, very articulate in Spanish. But he was bilingual prior to the stroke. He wanted to return back to work where he was going to need English. So we decided to shift our emphasis to trying to restore some of his English. Keeping in mind, we weren't teaching him English he didn't know before the stroke. That's not our job. Mm-hmm. But we were trying to restore the language that he'd had prior to the stroke. Again, he had very little output or comprehension in English. So we started working on just building his vocabulary and working on functional concrete nouns and trying to get those back, and tried different evidence-based approaches, different queuing hierarchies and feature analyses, and we were getting nowhere. And I started to notice he was getting frustrated. I was getting frustrated. He wasn't doing his homework, which was very unusual for him. Mm. And so I finally sat down and had a conversation. What's going on? And he looked at me and he said, I just want to go to Starbucks and be able to order coffee. And I thought, oh my God, what have we been doing? What have we been doing? Yes, we've been engaged in evidence-based practice, but it hadn't been meaningful to him. It hadn't been what he needed to do with his English. He didn't need to restore every vocabulary word. He wanted to be able to go and order coffee at Starbucks. So we completely revamped what we did and started focusing on still using evidence-based practice, but what we shifted to was using a backward chaining approach to develop key phrases that he wanted to be able to say in English, like, I'd like a latte, or where's the restroom? These really functional English phrases, which is what he needed to start with and what was going to improve his quality of life. That literally was an aha moment.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we have been doing this wrong. And it made me really think about, yes, evidence-based practice is important, and I absolutely support the need to engage in it. But it reminded me it needs to be relevant to the client.
You see, one of the things I like about that is that it really gets to the simple core of what you want to do in recovery. There's an academic approach to being able to have a smooth gait and full extension and rotation on your shoulder and access to your language, ability to write and read and retain information. And all of those things are extremely important, and I don't intend to minimize that at all. What's important to realize, though, is that those are features of our life. Those are features of what we can accomplish. Essentially, they're like the specs on a laptop. They're just bullet points that talk about what that piece of hardware has in it. They're bullet points of the list of skills that we have within our capabilities. But one of the things we teach in sales is that it's not about the features. It's never about the features. It's about the benefits. When I'm selling a product to somebody, it really doesn't matter what the specs are. What matters is what that product will do for that person. Having an extra large battery in a computer is not a compelling solution. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it means you can work longer without having to plug in. And it goes beyond that too, because what that means, for example, is that maybe if you are flying or traveling someplace on business, having that extra large battery means that you can get more work done on the plane or in the airports, and that means that when you get to your destination, you don't have to stay up all night working on stuff in the hotel room. You can get to bed earlier. An extra large battery isn't about having extra watts or extra energy. It's about being able to get a full night's sleep. That's what we mean when we talk about benefits. And when we talk about language recovery in aphasia access conversations right there, it wasn't about having a full vocabulary. It was about the patient who wanted to go to Starbucks. And, this is something that comes up again and again. And I think there's tremendous value in talking about that framework for stroke recovery. This patient wanted to be able to go to Starbucks and know how to order his beverage. A while back, when I talked to Ted Baxter about his book, Relentless, he talked about one of his big goals with his language recovery was being able to go to Starbucks and get a latte, be able to order his beverage. One of the things that was important to my recovery, and I wasn't challenged with aphasia, was I wanted to be able to walk to the local Starbucks. And I could evaluate how well my walking was coming along, not by how smooth my gait was, or the exact time it took me to cross a street, or, how many steps I could do in a day. It was, can I walk to the Starbucks safely and still have the energy to enjoy a beverage and then walk back? And as my recovery progressed, as my walking got better, I could more easily get to the Starbucks. And then I could get to the next Starbucks. And my Starbucks radius here in Seattle gradually grew as my recovery progressed. And eventually I was able to add other things into that metric as well. Start thinking about, okay, can I get to the sushi place? Can I get to the donut place? Can I get to the grocery store? We talk about grocery stores a lot and, the importance of shopping and managing all that. That's a large part of what happens when you start talking with recreational therapists or occupational therapists about completing your activities of daily living to be able to attain your food and get back home and manage all of that. But ultimately, it's the joys in our life. It's getting that life back to where we want to be. And sometimes that means going and sitting down at the local coffee shop or at the local bar or at, the local park, whatever it is. That framework, that radius, that ability to go ahead and accomplish those things that bring joy to your life, that's really the core metric behind recovery. And I think by way of analogy, Starbucks is so ubiquitous across the United States and growing around the world that it's a great model to think about for stroke recovery. What can you do? How far can you go? Can you order? Can you do it safely? Can you process that? Can you manage the financial transaction that's part of that? Can you hold your beverage? Can you swallow your beverage? All of those different things can be tied into different aspects of our recovery in a Starbucks or a coffee shop model of recovery. So that's one of those things I wanted to focus on today, is talking about the core benefits that go along with doing these things. It's not about the features. It's not about the mechanics of the gate. It's about the benefit. It's what the mechanics of that gate. It's what access to those words let us do. The benefits are what make our life better. The benefits are what make our caregivers and our partners' lives better. And let's focus on doing what we can to achieve those benefits. Now, another note on that clip from Aphasia Access Conversations. That's another great podcast to check out. Whereas most of the stroke-related podcasts I talk about are survivor-led or focused on survivors, the Aphasia Access podcast is more of an academic show. It's mostly speech pathologists focused on the LPA treatment framework regarding aphasia, and that is the life participation approach for aphasia. And so if you want to hear what speech pathologists talk about and the research they talk about and some of the things that they are talking about in their industry, it's a great show to listen to and to sort of like listening in on the conversations among some of your speech therapists. The other thing I want to touch on today is some news from some previous podcast guests. You may remember when I talked with Dr. Kimberly Brown back in, I believe that was episode 40. You can hear that over at strokecast.com/Kim. Dr. Brown is an ER physician in the Southeast United States, and she talked with us about her story. She talked about, the treatment challenges around stroke in the stroke belts of the United States. And of course, we talked about what happens when a stroke patient comes into the ER. Anyway, Dr. Brown has a new book out. It's called It's an Emergency: Understanding the What, How, and Why of Your ER Visit. It's available on Amazon, and I would encourage you to go check that out. And congratulations again to Dr. Brown on the release of her book. Another story that's been making the rounds of social media in the stroke communities and the shares is a recent New York Times profile of Ted Baxter, author of Relentless. We talked with Ted some months back at strokecast.com/relentless about his journey from experiencing a stroke induced by a clot that formed in his leg on a long flight to his challenges of overcoming his physical disabilities and his challenges of working through his aphasia as he learned to live his new post-stroke life. And that interview, by the way, is another one where we talked about the importance of Starbucks. What's really cool is that Ted's story and the story of his former wife, Kelly, were also just featured in the New York Times. So I linked to those articles over in the show notes and at strokecast.com/jelly and Starbucks. Congratulations to Ted Baxter for that profile. And hey, New York Times, if you'd like to feature more stroke survivors and professionals, I'm certain we're happy to make some of those introductions for you. And that brings us to our hack of the week. This week's hack comes to us from one-handed lady golfer Gianna Rojas.
I ripped the ligaments on my right thumb.
Ooh.
So I literally was without thumbs for about, 16 weeks. I had to wear the splint before the surgery, and then after the surgery, I was 10 weeks in a hard cast.
Mm.
And that's where my adaptive clothing and my Velcro stuff kicked in, because I figured out a way. I just learned to tie my shoe a different way, so I can tie my shoes,
Mm-hmm.
but not without any thumbs. Right. And so that's where I found these skirts from this company called B-Skins. That is, they're you step in and pull them up. There's no buttons, there's no zippers, they're stretchy. I love them now because they're just convenient, and I can roll them all and I can carry a whole week's worth of clothes in a backpack and not have to iron one thing when I take it out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
A lot of adaptive design is just really good design.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And keyword is adapt. You know, you have to be adaptive for whatever happens in your life. You have to be adaptive. It's either that or you're just going to be miserable and sitting home and doing nothing.
You can hear more from Gianna in strokecast.com/golf. So that's it for this week. What aspects of your hospital stay influenced your recovery in ways that you did not expect? Go ahead and let us know in the new Facebook group over at strokecast.com/Facebook group and share your thoughts with the community. Lately, I've been sharing some more aspects of my story and the podcast over on Instagram. You can check that out on Instagram by following Bills_Strokecast, or just go to strokecast.com/Instagram. If you'd like to share this episode with somebody else, be sure to give them the link, strokecast.com/StarbucksandJelly. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.